Hello, everyone, and welcome to Fringe Legal Edge on Litera TV. Before we get started, Heidi, thank you for joining me. Do a quick
My
technical
pleasure.
test. You can hear me and see me.
All good.
Okay, excellent. Well, yeah, and thanks everyone. So this is a weekly experimental segment where we talk to leaders and experts about various things, all aimed at giving your practice an edge, whether you work in-house or you work in a law firm. And today I am so excited to be speaking with Heidi Gardner. Heidi is the Distinguished Fellow and Lecturer on law at Harvard Law School. She is also the foremost authority, I would like to think, on collaboration. She's done a lot of work on smart collaboration. We'll talk about what that means. And yeah, I'm really excited to have Heidi here. I mentioned this to her when I reached out, that actually been following some of her work for, I would say, probably a few months. Someone tipped me about some of her work, and I was just thrilled that she said yes. So yeah, I'm excited to have you here. Thank you, thank you for joining me.
My pleasure indeed. Thanks for having me.
And where are you joining us from today, Heidi?
I'm actually outside of Boston. So just
Yeah.
returned from our home in the mountains. We were sheltering there amongst the moose and the porcupines for quite some time. And now excited to be back in, what seems to be sort of civilization.
Sort of civilization, exactly. Well, yeah, thanks again. So I guess a good place to start. So I teed this up and I teased this session as talking about smart collaboration with in-house lawyers in mind. Before we go down that path, just for anyone who doesn't know, explain to us what collaboration is to you, and specifically what does smart collaboration mean for anyone who is not familiar with your work?
Absolutely. So smart collaboration is a concept that I've been studying with my research team at Harvard for over a decade. And initially, we were turned on to this idea by a number of the executives that I was teaching, because my research back when I was doing my dissertation, which feels like 1,000 years ago, but that was focused on looking at client service teams in professional firms. Prior to academia, I was with McKinsey for half a decade in New York and London and Johannesburg. And there I was focused, coming out of that, was focused very much on the question of how teams use their members' expertise to the fullest. How do we bring together a group of highly diverse people? Like at McKinsey, a lot of the teams I was leading had astrophysicists and professional musicians and former Army captains and MBAs, and we'd come together, and in some of those instances, we did a brilliant job of really bringing out the unique perspectives of everyone. And other times it was kind of like, a solid job, but it wasn't as great as it should have been. And so, my burning question in academia started with how to optimize those kinds of client service teams. But then, as I was teaching at Harvard Business School, especially teaching really seasoned professionals, they asked, all right, how do we get the top of each of those teams to work together? So how do we get, the head of corporate and the head of litigation, the head of tax and the head of real estate to join forces to create an integrated client solution, rather than looking at everything as only a tax problem or only, an audit problem or whatever their domain was.
So just so I understand it, so the purpose here is to make sure that you're coming up with a holistic solution, utilizing the right people. And there's a difference between that and just making sure that you have a team working on a project, right?
100%, 100%, absolutely. So, we really start from the client-centered perspective. What's the problem the client is trying to solve, or what problem should they be solving, right?
Mm-hmm.
Rather than just addressing the symptoms, what are some of the bigger systemic issues that are creating a problem here? We describe those problems with the acronym VUCA, VUCA, volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous. And, and virtually every problem we're thinking about, certainly in today's environment, is VUCA and requires a multidisciplinary perspective. No one should be arrogant enough to think that they've got the answer. Rather, they should be thinking about kind of where's the limit of my expertise, and who is somebody just on the other side of that border who brings a different perspective.
Yeah.
And knitting together, integrating those different perspectives to solve more complicated VUCA problems in a holistic, tailored solution, that's the act of collaboration. And, that's why we're seeing collaboration just exploding in these days. In the COVID environment, we need, healthcare policy makers and regulators and, economists and supply chain experts all coming together to figure out how to move forward. Because any one of those perspectives on its own could lead us, slightly in the wrong direction, or certainly in an incomplete solution.
Yeah, and by the way, we'll probably end up going in a whole bunch of tangents. I know you'll sort of play along with that. It's interesting, as you were talking about optimization. One of the thoughts that came to my mind, certainly from a, I guess, management consulting point of view, is, optimization doesn't mean being able to deliver things in the most efficient and effective way. I think that's a more natural definition. It's about removing variability, or at least controlling variability, right? And it is one of the endpoints to working and being more collaborative in a smart way, to reduce the amount of variability, or be able to predict that in a smarter way as well.
Yes and no. So I think that the intentional reduction of variability is one particular outcome. When you think about it just in a colloquial sense, 4 eyes are better than 2, right? From a risk management perspective, it's generally quite useful to get people from different domains pressure testing a solution before you roll it out. So from that perspective of lowering risk, yes. But the flip side, Ab, is that you can get tremendous innovation from multidisciplinary working. Everyone who studies innovation in the sciences, in the arts, in social sciences, understands that there really aren't that many brand new ideas. Real innovation comes from the integration of existing bits of knowledge in new combinations.
Yeah.
And innovation actually is both creativity, as we think about it, but it's creativity applied. Yeah. And so it requires kind of that blue sky, crazy thinking, and then people who have a very concrete, literal way of thinking, incredibly pragmatic and practical, to add their piece in, right? This is the call for diversity, not just the blue sky thinkers, but the pragmatic thinkers, and marrying them up to create something that's truly innovative, and you can use it. An innovation that is impractical is almost by definition not an innovation. It's just a crazy thing.
Yeah, very much so. And I think we'll start digging into the practicalities of this as well, and then focusing a little bit on legal, so talking about lawyers in-house as well. It's to frame, I suppose, the picture, and hopefully no one will argue with this or disagree with this, but if you do, please do tell me. I would love to hear from you, which is currently, as you find almost any knowledge professional working, you'll see an increased number of specialists, right? And it's becoming more and more granular. Yes. You talked about astrophysicists before, now just even more specialization there. Those that are just looking at black holes, or those that are just looking at, red dwarfs, or whatever it might be. And the complexity of problems is significantly increasing. So I absolutely agree with you. And I think you may have said it sometime in the past, or maybe wrote somewhere, that really the purpose of working in this smart collaborative way is to help your clients in a way that they don't even know they need help with, right? So I think that's and one of the other points, and as you were saying, talking about this innovative ideas, is I think for any business, and certainly within law firms and practice, you need to have an innovation pipeline, and that pipeline needs to stretch all the way from what are the short-term, probably the low-hanging fruit things, all the way to the moonshot ideas, right? But you do need to make them somewhat practical.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, as I'm listening to you, I love hearing people talk about my research, because for me, hearing my research and other people's words is always is really illuminating. It makes me think about it even more deeply and broadly. And as I was listening to you, one of the ways I was thinking about collaboration, especially smart collaboration, not just, kind of the big group hug collaboration, really the tough work of bringing these disciplines together. It allows us to think about problems, as you were alluding to, proactively. Yeah. Right now we're hearing, I just ran a survey yesterday with a whole group of GCs online, and asked them how their outside legal advisors can allow them to add the most value to their business. So, if you're a GC, what do you want your external counsel to give to you that allows you to walk with confidence and knowledge and expertise into the C-suite, into the boardroom? And number one of all the different kinds of domains, number one was industry-specific insights. And I think right now in the COVID era, in this era of civil unrest, in the newfound enlightenment around systemic racial injustice in this country and many others. We need people who are willing to open our eyes to lots of new ideas.
Yeah.
Some of those, like these GCs, coming back to this poll, some of those are going to come from within one's own industry. So tell me what's happening. I'm an energy executive. Tell me what's happening in energy companies around the world. Tell me what's happening in biotech companies like mine.
Yeah.
And yet, what's interesting is oftentimes the most sort of blue sky innovation does happen from very different domains.
Yeah.
And I think it's incumbent on external advisors, be they lawyers, be they consultants, accountants, and so forth, to work really hard behind the scenes and knit together different perspectives from across sectors.
Yeah.
That, I think, is really going to keep pushing the clients ahead. We had a phenomenal example of this recently. We did some research with Hogan Lovells, and Ina Brock gave us a great example of when they were working in the beginning of sort of the crisis era with some of their automotive clients. And Hogan Lovells was able to bring together their experts from their biotech and regulatory, as well as automotive, to work with some of the automotive clients to switch production to ventilators. And their ability to get FDA approval for these devices in a matter of days, where it would normally take, God knows, weeks, months, was this incredible outcome. And we're diving into that now in a sort of deeper case study to say, what does it take kind of proactively behind the scenes, maybe years of investment ahead of time, so that when you need it, the ball drops and you've got to do something, people have the relationships, the knowledge, the trust in each other, and the systems in place to be able to come together and collaborate in that way. Now, that is smart collaboration.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that stood out to me, by including this really cross-sectional group of individuals and this sort of, I'm going to call it biodiverse way of thinking about problems, is it allows you to better prepare for things that you may not know you will encounter in a short term. You'll read about, I know the automotive industry went through this exact process, albeit with a different authority. How can we transpose that way of thinking into our problem? And actually, I've been thinking a lot about this recently, and talking about just different subject matters around looking at biological systems and organic biological systems. And almost every node that touches on this is bidirectional. There is no singular way of thinking about it. And that's how your brain functions. That's how you want to think about things. And it just means that and actually probably contrary to logic, it means that you become better at your specialist area, because you can then bring about much more diverse way of thinking and solving complex problems.
Absolutely. I mean, analogic reasoning is really important. Simply being able to open our way of thinking to kind of new perspectives. How is it that they managed to accomplish X in such a short amount of time? What would happen if? And I think it's those what if questions that really spur us to question our assumptions. And I love that kind of thinking. And, it's a rare individual who can sit in a dark room all by herself and think big thoughts. I mean, our folklore is riddled erroneously with these singular heroes, who sat beneath an apple tree and got bonked on the head, right? I mean, seriously, that did not come from one individual. And I think that we love the myth of the hero. And yet, for every Da Vinci out there, there is a workshop full of apprentices. For every scientific breakthrough, there is an entire lab, and usually, a decade's worth of people in that lab getting toward the moment, that somebody said eureka.
Well, and as the idiom goes, right, it's standing on the shoulder of giants, right? It's not just that one person standing on top of a hill waving a flag that I did it. It is everyone else who's came before them.
That's it. And, one of the things that I talk with law firm leaders and leaders of legal teams in-house is asking them to reflect on what stories they tell. every anthropologist will tell you that culture is made of stories. And I ask people, individually and institutionally, what are your stories? And, when people step back, they often realize that they are telling these heroic individual stories, the great man story, the great woman story. And, people do deserve credit. I mean, sometimes people make, outsized efforts, they accomplish something really phenomenal, but let's be more mindful of what it took to get them there. And let's give, credit where it's due. And I think that that's an important lesson for us when we think about those stories is, yes, there may be a hero, but chances are there's a team of heroes as well.
Exactly. And I think so. As we start sort of moving the conversation into the in-house legal teams and how this will help them. So just to lay the background, you've just released, I think, was it this month, last month, your new book on smart collaboration for in-house legal teams. And there's a number of benefits to do that. So just so people have, I guess, a baseline on why they should do it. And I'll summarize the benefits. And as we talk about how these function in practice, one is you're able to solve the complex problems more effectively, and especially things that have necessarily become complex because the world is more complex. I think about cybersecurity issues, for example. It's about, and you've already touched on this, how do you come up with better innovative outcomes for your clients? It's about the network strength, and we didn't really touch on this. I think you have some great anecdotes on this, so we may get into it. And it's about actually risk mitigation, right? The more people you have that have some understanding of this knowledge, the easier it will be to do the handover, or if you're on holiday, somebody else can take over. That's a very easy outcome there. But yeah, tell us a little bit more about what led to the creation of this book, and I'll probably touch on some of the data points, and then we can dig into some of these things in more detail.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, this book really has its roots in an earlier book I wrote in 2017. It was released, Smart Collaboration, How Professionals and Their Firms Succeed by Breaking Down Silos. And, I was delighted that became a Washington Post bestseller. It got a huge amount of traction. And that's where we debuted our empirical approach to studying collaboration. I frankly was sick and tired of hearing that collaboration was a soft topic. Some people treated it as the kind of, oh, nice to have, the thing we'll do when our real work is finished. And so by taking this, kind of hard-edged, highly quantitative, geeky, statistical perspective, I teamed up, I brought mathematicians and economists and statisticians onto my team. And, we dug into the numbers. And we were able to demonstrate empirically that collaboration led to this is, not just associated with, not just in the, in the atmosphere. It statistically, we can demonstrate that collaboration comes first, people reaching across, working with other kinds of professionals in other jurisdictions, in other industries and so forth. When we quantify that kind of collaboration through, the millions of data records we've got, we can demonstrate empirically that it leads to an uplift in, say, revenues and profits. Law firms or practice groups or client service teams that engage in this kind of cross-silo collaboration are simply more successful from a business perspective. And it's more sustainable business. We know that when clients are served by a team of people with this cross-disciplinary perspective, the team, any one individual in that team is seen as less fungible. And that is a finding that could translate into the legal department as well. We know, because in our research for our book for Smart Collaboration for In-House Legal Teams, which is, kind of the sequel to the first one, we found that it was really important for us to interview the senior executives outside legal. People who are, essentially the GC's clients. We talked to CEOs and COOs. We talked to plenty of board members, non-executive directors, chairs of boards, heads of various committees on the board of directors. And, consistently we heard the message that they needed their lawyers to be more than just a lawyer. We heard again and again that when the lawyers were teaming up to serve, the C-suite, the board, they were considerably more effective because they were able to contextualize, some of the technical legal expertise, which is frankly, baseline. That's why they have a lawyer on staff. But they were able to contextualize that in the commercial landscape, in the market dynamics, in the strategic objectives of the corporation or the bank or the hospital. And that's why a team is incredibly powerful, and creates more loyal, more satisfied clients. And that happens for teams of lawyers in a firm, and it happens for teams in-house when they're serving their internal clients.
Yeah, and so couple of points there. One, I love the book, both of them, and I would say, arguably, as you're talking about it, you kind of took the other extreme end of the approach. So it's not a soft skill anymore. Here's the hard evidence. But what I really enjoyed about the book is how you translate that data into actionable insights, and it makes it real. So as you are, which becomes a challenge, frankly, as you're trying to create business cases for being able to solve these problems internally, in saying, oh, we should collaborate. We shouldn't be these siloed positions. Here is the data, and this is what it tells you. Here is where it's worked before. That's super important. And the other thing is, I'll echo everything that you said. As I speak to GCs, and frankly, it's good that you go to their clients, just like, as law firms, they should go to the GCs. You remove the bias. It's so true that that's all they want right now, which is, how do we work better with you? How can we help you understand this is what's important to our business, right?
Absolutely.
We haven't picked you out from this panel because, we're friends. It's because you have the baseline legal expertise. So that should be a given. Let's not talk about that anymore.
Yeah.
How do you actually service what we need today? The pressure on me as a CEO or a board member is X. This is what I need. So actually having that discussion, I would say, at a minimum should be happening. And the second thing, which I think is in your books, is about, some of the ways to do that is having these rotations in non-legal teams, right? Start being exposed and become understanding of, this is what this business does. You're working for a oil or gas company or energy company or pharma company. These are all the other roles and the demands that are being pushed on them.
Absolutely. So, when I looked at the careers of some of the more sophisticated GCs in our research sample, many of them had those kinds of rotations, and they felt wildly privileged to have been able to work, on a UN panel and then come back into the business, or, and that kind of experience and exposure is, very broadening and really liberating in terms of how they described their thinking evolved. But even for people who didn't have that extreme, transfer from, Australia to Japan to Georgia, that for kind of people with a perhaps more constrained career path for a variety of reasons, they can still pursue that curiosity and cultivate that curiosity by doing, small things. One person described, every time he'd go to a meeting anywhere across the US, he would find the closest location where his company had some kind of footprint, and he'd go sit in the customer service center, the call center, and listen to what the CSR reps were dealing with from irate customers. All right, well, that's a pretty good, a grounding. Spend an hour on the phones with unhappy customers, and you get a pretty good understanding of of your market positioning. Go into the factory and and take a factory tour. Spend some time in the canteen with the shop floor workers, or do rounds in the hospital, or whatever it takes. And the people who loved their job enough to invest in that kind of broad-based understanding came out not only more knowledgeable, but fascinating for me to see, they came out more humble as well. And I think that kind of humility and empathy allowed them to be incredibly successful in their roles going forward.
And I would say your clients will probably be biting your hand off if you take that kind of interest in what they're doing. I used to work for a PR research company that was under WPP as a big brand. And as part of their key accounts team, we had to spend 2 to 3 days working on site at the client, right? And the work that I did there was exactly the same as the work I would do in the office. but the ability to just walk over and listen to the conversation that's happening around you, the ability to actually cross-pollinate with people, frankly, I would never speak to otherwise, was
Yeah.
so beneficial. And when we delivered the materials to them, you could actually add something that's more real, not just based on pure data, which is important, but also, hey, this is how this impacts this team, which you may not have thought about, right? Because the scope is so small.
Yeah, it sounds really familiar. I mean, in my time at McKinsey, often we'd spend 4 days a week embedded at the client.
Yeah.
And, part of that is around developing relationships. Part of it is around developing knowledge. And as I said, a lot of it is around developing empathy, because it's one thing to deliver the technically superior piece of advice.
Yeah.
But if it can't be implemented for whatever reason, it's worth virtually nothing. And I think that lawyers both in-house and externally who are genuinely passionately curious about the domain that they're working in often manage to do that.
Yeah, and just to wrap this up, and I do want to get to one or two more points. I'm conscious of time. One of the things I talked about, and probably because it resonated strongest with me, was the network strength benefit, and that was that working with non-legal peers leads to both a wider network, but also better knowledge, more trusted advice, and essentially greater business outcome. I think it was, you get 4x greater business outcome in terms of revenue, and that was amazing. And as you were talking about being more connected, I think a litmus test for everyone to do internally, if you're a GC, go on your LinkedIn, look at all of your connections, and see how many of those connections are non-legal folks. Right, that's a good test, and anyone who's a data scientist, feel free to run the data. Right, create a graph of that. That'll be quite useful to see how well are you connected to people that are not lawyers.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And it's one thing to have a LinkedIn connection. It's another thing to have a dialogue where you're genuinely just there to learn.
Yeah.
And I'd encourage people to do that. I mean, I'm such a nerd. I have these conversations all the time. My poor 2 teenage daughters, if I say collaboration around them anymore, I have to pay them a nickel sort of thing, because they've just grown up hearing me have these discussions. But it's because I love what I do. And I actually really want to know how somebody on the front lines of this business, collaborates with people over there, because I'm passionate about it. And I think that when we open ourselves up to that kind of learning, we never know what we're going to learn, but we can be guaranteed we're going to learn something that will be valuable.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that is a wonderful place to start wrapping up. We have about 4 minutes. We've only just scratched the tip of the iceberg, and I wish we can continue the conversation further. For those that want to find out a bit more about just smart collaboration generally from your 2017 work, or for in-house legal teams, or just want to learn a bit more about some of these ideas, where should they go?
So our website is Gardner & Co, gardenandco.co. So gardenandco.co. And we have an insights page there that has an archive of all of my published works for the last 10 plus years, which is certainly the one place to start.
Awesome. And thank you so much. And I would say in wrapping up, we barely scratched the surface. I would say it is absolutely worth looking into how collaborative your business and your practice is being. How do you make it smarter? And we've just looked at some of the benefits. And my takeaway ultimately is it is not a soft skill. And even if you think it's a soft skill, think of it as a soft skill that will have measurable impact, as Heidi, your research has shown, to your practice. I don't know if you have any other takeaways. We have about 3 minutes, and then we can hand over to our next.
Well, I'd be remiss if I didn't acknowledge, chapter 1 of the first book was about the business case for collaboration, but chapter 2 is the talent case for collaboration. And I think right now it's really crucial for us to think about how we bring people together. Again, not in a soft, touchy-feely way, but that has important benefits both for the humans involved in terms of their well-being and in terms of the organization. The ability to attract, engage, and retain top talent is a critical differentiator for organizations, and I encourage them to think about collaboration as a means to achieve those outcomes as well.
Sounds wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Heidi, for coming on. It was wonderful having you as a guest. And thank you, everyone, for listening. Have a wonderful weekend. We have Will Carter coming up next in just a few minutes. Thank you.
Thank you.